Okay. Can you hear me?
You hear me? That's good. One. Yes. Breathe. Breathe.
Good. This is the Norwegian version. We are very strict on time. 5 minutes is 5 minutes. Sorry to introduce this cultural element, but that's how it is. Any questions, responses, protests, questions that you would like to give? We have a microphone here, so. Okay, up there.
Alô, boa tarde. É só um comentário, professor. O professor fez uma brincadeira que seria um terapeuta patológico, porque não observava transferências eróticas. Mas o comentário é o seguinte: o nível de envolvimento do professor com os seus trabalhos, na minha visão, demonstram que o professor faz muitas transferências de envolvimento.
Color.
My machine didn't work good. Could you just give me a quick translate? Or translate again, please. Could you say it again?
É só um comentário que o professor disse que não era um terapeuta patológico porque não observou na sua prática muitas transferências eróticas. Mas observando tua fala, vejo esse nível de envolvimento são transferências com certeza, no meu ponto de vista.
Okay. Thanks. Yes, I'm a strong believer of emotional involvement. So I know there is many different ways of understanding transference. Also, thanks. Any other? Yes.
Fala em português. Quando você fala que você não usa a diagnose, que é melhor não usá-la, mas o serviço requer uma diagnose para você começar o tratamento. Como que você lida com o serviço quando isso acontece?
I'll specify a bit. It's not that I don't use diagnosis, but I think it's important to be able to work also in a non-diagnostic way, because there are a lot of families that I work with where diagnostics is very important. Now, my understanding, sorry, I just got a Portuguese voice here, so just, sorry. I was hearing. For me, diagnosis is basically three things. First of all, in my country, it's a ticket. It's a ticket for health services. When you are given a diagnosis, all the welfare state's good open up for you. So by not giving a diagnosis, I am stopping people from help. So I give diagnosis. The second thing is that diagnosis can be a communication. The problem with diagnosis is communication is what do they communicate? And in my lifetime, a lot of psychiatric diagnosis has communicated marginalization, stigmatization, blame, a lot of these negative effects. So there is a lot of negative side effects in a lot of society when it comes to diagnosis. So that's the problematic. The most important part of diagnosis for me is that basically diagnosis is a description of what I could expect when I meet a person. But expectancy can always be wrong. So for instance, if I hear about the person who has been given the diagnosis of schizophrenia, as I met two men in Marilia who were talking about their experience as suffering from schizophrenia. I would know that I met a person who was struggling with communication with me, a person who might have other voices than the ones I was hearing. And when I wanted to relate to that person in a responsive manner, I would have to take into account that these were experiences that this person had, and whether they were positive or negative, they would be important. So, for instance, hearing voices, as I know it, has developed ways of meeting persons who hear voices. When I started work in psychiatric hospitals, psychologists, psychiatrists, nurses didn't even speak with the person because they thought schizophrenia had no way of being in contact with other people. To say it very badly, your brain and behavioral was generally fucked. There was no way of talking. I worked as a nursing assistant, staying together with people who struggled with these things, and realized that they were persons you could talk with, but they experienced things very differently from me. So I worked in the hospital in England, and this guy came up to me and he said, "I don't exist." And I told him, "But I see you." And he smiled and he said, "There you can see how much trouble you're in." So, so diagnoses for me are helpful if I can sort of use that as something to investigate with another person. But if I start to couple it with marginalization and these things, then I think it's dangerous. Okay.
Oi. Eu queria perguntar um pouquinho, não precisa, queria perguntar um pouquinho do seu trabalho atual, se é no consultório, se é em serviço público, que você comentasse um pouquinho da equipe também que você falou com quem você trabalha. Seu trabalho é no consultório, em serviço público, para ele falar um pouquinho da equipe com a qual ele trabalha.
This is the place to talk about love. I love the team that I used to work with. And I think it's important to build a sort of a good relationship with those you work with. Because if you have a good relationship with your colleagues, I think it's easier to work with creating a collaborative and good relationship with families who sometimes do things that you don't understand and that you spontaneously would react to as negative, for instance. I'll just tell a story about this. We were 5 people. We were sitting in each office, and we had this place where we worked with the family. Then we were forced to move. And because of lack of money, space problems, we were put into a huge room to share so we were 6 people sitting in one room. So we worked together for 2-3 years again, and then we were forced to move again. And we demanded to have an open space. We didn't want offices. Why? Think you've been talking with the family. You feel a bit a failure as a therapist. You haven't managed really to establish the kind of conversations you would like to establish. You come into this huge room where there are desks and your colleagues are sitting, and two or three of my colleagues are working on their medical journal, which is extremely boring work. And we had a computerized system that made us sort of really have to do a lot of things we didn't like. So I come into the room and I say, I don't know what to do. I feel shit as a therapist. They are very happy to stop writing the medical journal. And we had a table in the middle of the room. We grab coffee or tea and we sit down and we have a conversation about my predicament. And very much these conversations was not about the family, it was about me. What could I do differently? What was it that I was struggling with? So I think the team is extremely important. I'm not sure I would move in with them. And we had a sort of a person distance, but we didn't go to bed or anything like that, but I love them. I love them. Okay, thank you. Okay. I'll keep going, and we can get back, if that's okay. I'm going to move up there, because my memory is going, and I don't quite remember what I put up there. So, if you can bear with me. Hello. I did a PhD study the practice that I was part of. I interviewed 10 families and I interviewed my colleagues. And through that I created some descriptions on what we were trying to do. So I'll just tell you what's up there because I know you can't see it. But think, when we work, and when I looked at the interviews, I realized that our work, and especially the interviews with the families, were important. They were the ones who guided me the most as a researcher. Think that there are 3 different domains of being together with persons. One has to do with the relationship, as I've talked a bit about. Another has to be me as a participant in therapy. And the third area has to do with how we speak with the family. So, let's see what just a second, sorry. So, think that there is one group of things that has to do with the relationship. What is it that makes a relationship helpful? So on the left side here is something that I call the helpful relationship. Think of this as a thread. And this thread consists of smaller threads. So what does specify a helpful relationship? It has to do what I've already told you. But the families talked about collaboration. You have to collaborate with us. And collaboration means to listen to the family, take them seriously, and believe what they're saying. And to follow their preferred goals and methods. So this I've already told you. But they also said that it's important that you conduct yourself in a non-judgmental manner. You get that word? That you sort of try not to be look down on people. The second part of this helpful relationship is self-disclosure. That these families said that it's important that you tell us something about yourself, that we get to know you as a person. There is a lot of psychotherapy research that says that self-disclosure of therapists is important under one condition, and that is that you tell a story about yourself as a comment or a sort of response to something in the family. So, my daughter, I work with a family who struggle with their teenage daughter to put up limits. And they are very shameful of how they've treated the girl. The father has sort of shaken her, not hit her, but he's sorry. I remember suddenly a story with me. I was a single father. I was alone with my daughter due to my wife having passed away with cancer. My daughter was 14. She did not want to tidy her room. Do any of you have daughters where the things grow? Panties, bras, handkerchiefs, socks. It's like, and on top of that she complained, where are my socks, panties, handkerchiefs? So I said, you have to tidy the room yourself. And she never did do it. And I got more and more frustrated. What should I do? And when fathers get frustrated, they sometimes get angry. So at one point I said, okay, so I'll do it for you. I'm going to tidy your room. This was in the second floor, above a small garden, and there were apartments beside each other. So my neighbor, good neighbor, was sitting in his garden. I opened the window, I take all the clothes of my daughter and throw it out of the window. And you see panties and bras coming down into the vegetable garden that I'd arranged outside. And my neighbor looks up to me and said, Rolf, do you think these things you are planting will grow up again? It's a joke. It's hard to tell a joke in another country. So then I realized my thought was, geez, this is not good fathering. So I just told my daughter, I'll go out and pick it up. So I out in the vegetable garden picking up all this stuff. I told the father this story. And I said, I've talked with my daughter about it. She's teasing me. And sometimes she tells this terrible story about this father, but she always does it to tease me. And I don't think she really took any harm. But I think part of the story is that I said, I'm sorry. We know from developmental psychology, it's not the breaches of contact between parent and child who is the problem, it's the lack of repair. If you go into YouTube and look at something called still face, you will see this, how this is documented, that 85% of transactions between child and infant is defined by breaches, ruptures, and then a repair. And this is a much more learning, children learn much more from this than a perfect relationship. I usually say that the worst thing you can do with a child, or if not the worst things, at least one of the worst things, is to have perfect parents. Perfect parents, you cannot overgo them. You can't compete with them. You're doomed to be a failure with perfect parents. So I don't recommend them. So this is an example of self-disclosure. But if I'd told that story because I had bad conscience and I wanted comfort from the families, that would not be appropriate in the therapy context. The last here is something called fight, violation, disparagement, and degradation. A lot of these families that I work with have experienced some kind of degradation, violation. They've been seen as the problem. So for instance, I've learned a lot with kids who fall out of school. The school blames the parents. If the parents was good, it would be good for the child. Very often the parents blame the school and say, if we had a good school, I would have a good child. Usually with these families, what I simply discovered was I asked the families, what do you want me to do? And they say, can you go to the school and create a better collaborative relationship for us? We've tried, we've been very angry, we've even used abusive language, but it just made things worse. So then I could say to the family, okay, I can go to a meeting, but you recommend that I don't use abusive language? And they say, no, you mustn't do that, we've tried it, it doesn't work. So then I would set up a meeting with the school. The school would say, okay, we will try to do our thing, but the parents have to do this. I would go back to the parents and say, the school are willing to do this, but they want you to do this. And then there is a negotiative process. And gradually, if we manage to set it up, things change both at school and at home. But I've learned that generalizations are overrated. Change in the family does not necessarily make change in the school. Change in the school does not necessarily make change in the families. You have to work on all arenas. You follow me on that? Okay. So, this is things that the family specify as important for us in order to have a helpful relationship, that the relationship is helpful. Then there is something called the helpful participation. It is to do with families' expectation that we know something. So this is the tension. In the relationship, I need to be in a not knowing position. At the same time, the families expect that I know something. I had a father who said, can you help me put up limits around my son? And I was trained as a family therapist not to give advice. So I answered the father with questions. So every time he asked for an advice, I answered with a question. He said, what should I do? And I said, yeah, do you have any thoughts on what you can do? That's why I'm asking you, I have no thoughts. How come you have no thoughts? In the end, the father got very annoyed, and he said to me, listen, are you a psychologist? And I said, yes. And he said, for how long did you study? And I said, for 6.5 years. And he said, and you didn't learn anything? So I got a bit embarrassed, and I said, well, the thing isn't that I don't know, but I'm afraid that I would come out as an expert on you. Pardon? Okay, yeah, great. Thank you. Just, you turn. So, where was I? Getting old. Can I put on the chair here? Great. And I'll just go back. So, is it right? Thank you. So, this man said to me, listen, I want to know what you know. And then I'm going to choose if I'm going to use anything of your knowledge. That's my business. But your business is to tell me what you know. So I got a bit. And I said, please, could you give me... What happened? Too fast? Can you hear? Is the other microphone? Does this make anything happen? Okay? Okay? Thank you. So, thanks. Obrigado. It's the only Portuguese word I can say. And Ribeirão Preto, that's the other one. Okay, so I said to the father, can you give me 30 minutes? Go out and have a cup of coffee. I have to think. So I sit down, I find 5 advices. I thought that's not much in 6.5 years. So I call a colleague. She gives me 3 other advices. I invite the father in. I do a lecture where I do a lecture for him. He says, thank you. I'll bring this home, think about it, and see if there is something I can use. From that point on, I've never been afraid of telling people about what I've learned in my courses. From this trip to Brazil, I would tell people about. But I would say that people, and it's very simple. It is an underestimation of people when you think that they don't think for themselves and they will follow blindly your advice. There are social situations where this happens, but that's usually a situation where there is some kind of power issue at play. So it's important to share and be transparent about your knowledge, and it's important, therefore, to build up a big toolbox. I would recommend young therapists to learn as many different ways of working as possible. But the most important skill you have to learn is to break rules. You have to break and step outside, be able to step outside of the protocol when it is needed to step outside the protocol. And I'll try to say more about how to achieve that after breaks that we will gonna have soon. But I just like to finish this. So if you can bear with me for 10-15 minutes, and we'll have a break. Okay, so the other thing that this thing says is understanding through participation. So one thing is to participate with your professional knowledge, but the other thing is to participate, I say the word I use, that I create understanding through participation. Egil is a very Viking name. He was my colleague in chief. I interviewed him and I asked him, what is the most important thing in your therapeutic work? And he said, I need to get a taste of it. I need to really get a taste of it. So I said, what do you mean? And in order to tell you, I'm going to tell a story that some of you already heard, those who've heard me before, but sometimes you just have some stories that stick because they have a bit of a pedagogical value. But this is the kind of story that could easily think of me as a therapist who has everything under control. This is a story about the other side of it, where you're without control. Mother and father referred, they want family therapy, and they want intensive family therapy. There's no collaborative problem with prior therapists, but they want family therapy. And the reason is that their 2 sons, 9 and 10, they are afraid that they will kill each other. That sounds a bit dramatic, 9 and 10 killing, but I mean, so here comes mother and father and 2 boys. Very nice boys, very polite, shakes hands, sits down, no quarrels, they're very, very nice. So I start to think, what is this? I can't really imagine how these boys could go into a fight that, one thing was kids fighting, but a fight where they really would experience and be afraid that they would kill each other. But the mother kept on and said, we have to look at this situation. So we decided to do a role play. So Egil, my colleague, in one room with the parents, preparing me in the other room with the 2 boys. And the idea is that we invite these boys to sort of play out a bit, quarrel. And then the mother and father should intervene, and Egil and I was invited to give advice on what to do differently. Yes? Good plan. I go into the room with the boys. I come as far as I managed to say to this boy, listen guys, we're going to have a sort of a game where you sort of play quarrel. Then the boy grabbed something on the table, one boy, and he hit his face in the middle of the face, really hard. And the other boy grabs his brother's ears. And he starts to pull his ears. And this is what, I'm sorry if I offend those with swear words, but swear words has a, so for me that's part of having a rich emotional, at least in my culture, if you want to express feelings, you do it with some bad words. I'm sorry, this is my upbringing. My father was a construction worker and not an academic. This is what Daniel Stern, developmental psychologist, called a weird fucking moment. It's the moment when the world stands still. It's the moment where you sort of, the only thing I register in these few seconds is my mouth going like, and there is, and the only thought is his ears is coming off. And then there is this sound, and suddenly the boys are sitting on the floor, and there is the mother. So what happens is in this split second, the boys scream, grabs ear, mother reacts in a second, just throws open the door, throws herself into the room between her sons, and just pushing them away so they really fall on the floor. The psychologist is trying to close his mouth. That's sort of, so my first response is, we better stop the role play. And we sit down, and what catches both Egil and me is that if we ever doubted what they were talking about, there was no doubt in my mind. I really saw the guy, this boy, losing his ears. Afterwards I thought, I saw the newspapers in Norway, boy without ears, mental health treatment. That was, so we sit down. So this is an example of getting a taste of it. There was no doubt in my mind what the mother was talking about. And we could start, for instance, both Egil and I said to the mother, listen, when these kinds of events happen, there's only one thing to do. Get the boys away from each other. Any good psychological or pedagogical response through verbal interventions would be bullshit. The boy would have lost his ears. There's only one thing to do. Get them the hell away from each other. And then this set up a situation where we could start to talk. For instance, it's led to it led into discussions of diagnostics, for instance, and other ways of treating. But it became very clear that Egil and I had nothing to teach them on how to stop these kinds of situations. So this is, and I think there's a lot of, I went to visit a Kappa today, I think some of them are here, and told me stories about kids living on the street, coming in, and you can feel both the despair and the hope in these situations. The despair of living on the street, the hope of having a Kappa that you comes to, you fed, you can shower, but also the struggle. And I think that the responses becomes more realistic when you've tasted what this is all about. So my fear of coming to Brazil, for instance, is that I'm very happy I've been here a week, because it have given me at least some experiential notion of what it is to live in Brazil. And the good thing is the samba, the food, the enjoyment I see that you have. You're a talkative people, you kiss on the cheek, all these things. That a cold Norwegian would sort of, I'm training now to give it, I'm training on that sound. And then the other side of it, which is that I know that you also are a country in deep trouble. And there are a lot of troubled people. The interesting thing I learned today is that although contexts are different, the families that comes to us in the team that I'm working was feeling despair. They were without hope. Although we have a good social system, things had happened in their life that made them also full of despair, and I could feel that despair, and at the same time when I felt that despair, it became easier to respond in a way that fitted to the families. And hopefully, the thing here is that I can believe that I'm managing it, but in the end, it's the experience of the families who counts. So after break, I'll say a bit about that. So the last thing for us they won't see that one either, so I'll get back to it. Okay, just leave it. Yeah. I don't think you see the presentation I'm talking about anyway, so I'll get back. For us, it's important to be flexible. Where do I talk? Outside the office, for instance, visit people at home. I don't know what are your possibilities, but if you have possibilities to work in different contexts, I think it's important to learn those kinds of skills. Okay, so there is the helpful relationship, it's the helpful participation, and the last thing is the helpful conversation. The first part has to do with all the skills that we are trained in as therapists when it comes to listening, let people have their say, have a slow tempo sometimes that people really can attend to their own inner dialogue and the outer dialogue. So the helpful conversation has to do with all the skills that you train in as health professions in order to talk with people. It also has to do with the fantastic fact that you can use language to reformulate. The family said, we have one picture, one way of talking. You bring in another. So I'll take an example from Michael White's work, Australian family therapist working with a mother and a boy who was supposed to be very violent. And there was a session where the boy had thrown a stone through the window. And this was an example of the boy's behavioral problem. Then, when Michael White interviews the mother, gradually there is a history that her boyfriend, the stepfather of the boy, were violent sometimes. And that what this boy had developed a skill of realizing, if this is going to continue, my stepfather is going to beat my mother. So he read the signs. So when he saw now it's going to happen, he took a stone and threw through the window. So the stepfather stops his actions. It never is turned into violence. He runs after the boy. So suddenly in this story, this behavioral problem of the boy is reformulated as rescuing behavior in a potentially dangerous situation for the mother. So the fantastic thing with language is that you can see things from different positions and give different meaning to it. So these families said that you have to have a helpful relationship, you have to participate as professionals and persons, but you have to talk with us. You have to give us time to think, but you also have to respond to us with new ways of thinking about our situation. And lastly, you have to give us feedback. The family is asking for feedback. That's the last point. And I usually said to the families, well, the difficulty with feedback, especially towards things that is experienced as negative, is that I could come out as judgmental. And then the families usually said that if you can behave in this way that is called the helpful relationship, we will have negative feedback because we would like to change. The other aspect of feedback is that, and this is what I'm going to talk about after the break, I, as a therapist, in order to work in this manner, I'm fully dependent upon feedback from the family. without feedback, I become lost in my own psychological world full of theories, research, judgments, and a lot of that shit that we healthcare workers sometimes do. Should we take 15 minutes break? Okay? 15 minutes break.